Welcome back to another session of suspense and thrill. Let me take you to the scene. Pitch dark. Midnight, 12 o'clock. Eerie sounds, strange noises are heard everywhere. And the animals are howling, shouting, roaring all round. You happen to be late to reach home, maybe because the bus was late, and you have to pass through a cemetery to reach your home. Alone in the pitch dark, not knowing what to do, frightened to the core, you move among all the strange noises. And you approach the cemetery, the burial ground, and your heart beat rises much above the normal one, and you can't but go. And you slowly, with faltering steps, you approach the cemetery, the burial ground, and you hear some strange noises from inside. And you happen to glance at the burial ground, and the sight you see there takes out your breath out of your life. There you see a man sitting in the coffin, a buried man, a few people running away from the scene. And what do you do next? And this is a scene we are placed in today. And this suspense scene is named One Summer Night. As we saw in the previous lesson, the night voices, similar situation, similar setup, background is here. And let's go with all the suspense into the lesson. The name is One Summer Night. If you take the lesson, and before we delve into the lesson, let's just have a look at the author. The author is Mr. Ambrose Bierce. His full name is Ambrose Bierce. He was born in 1842 in America. And he was one of the most famous short story writers of that time in America. And he was a journalist, a poet, a Civil War veteran. Because America was famous at that time for that. And he was involved in almost all these activities. And his most famous book is The Devil's Dictionary. And this book is considered one of the best masterpieces among the top 100 masterpieces of English literature in America. Okay, now before we have seen the author, Mr. Ambrose Bierce. The setup we have seen, a suspense. And he is known for his suspense and thrill. And here, let's just have the introduction of the characters so that we will have an outline to look into when you hear the story. So no misunderstanding will be there. So we have 4 characters or main people involved in it. And we can't say who is the protagonist, and almost all are equally involved in it. The first man is Mr. Armstrong. And it's interestingly a person who was buried before he was dead, but he dies at the end, and let's say that's a big suspense. Then comes Jess. Jess is a man who is involved in all the activities of the cemetery, the burial ground. He digs the ground, buries the dead, removes whatever be it. A man full time working in the cemetery. A man of courage. He is not at all frightened by anything. Nothing can frighten him. That is Mr. Jess. Then comes the other two characters, two students from the medical college. And in this story, those two students are there in the cemetery in search of a dead body for dissecting. So this is the setup and the characters we have. Let's just have a summary of the lesson before we go into the details. Here we find the story opening with Mr. Henry Armstrong. Henry Armstrong was in a coffin, buried, but he was not dead. Then why was he buried? He was buried in a coffin, put in a coffin and buried. The reason was that he was so sick that he could not even move, and people thought that he was dead. They put him in the coffin, take him to the cemetery, burial ground, bury him, and they go away. And he finds himself in the coffin in the dark. Meanwhile, two medical students approach Mr. Jess, who is the worker in the cemetery, the caretaker or the undertaker in the cemetery. They ask him for a dead body for dissection, because the medical students, they have to dissect the body and learn about the internal organs of the human body. Jess agrees to give a dead body. So at midnight, at 12, the two medical students come to the graveyard with a horse carriage, parks the carriage outside a bit far away so that nobody sees them. And then they come in. Jess is ready. He starts digging the fresh grave. The digging was easy because it was just, the dead body was just buried a few hours back. The mud is loose. He easily takes out the mud. And then he finds the coffin within the ditch. With bit difficulty, he takes out the coffin out, and the lid, the cover of the coffin is screwed with nail. He unscrews and takes out the lid away from the coffin, and there he sees Henry Armstrong lying in his white shirt and black pants. And within that time, while they were all watching, Henry Armstrong sits up with a bit of noise, not knowing what was happening. And seeing that, the two medical students scream at the top of their voice, taking their lives in their hands. They take to their heels, they run in full speed, howling like wild animals, never turning back. And they, Jess, a man of courage, a person who has seen this for years and years, the cemetery and the graveyard and the dead body and this, he does not get frightened. He stays back, and then next day morning, after much difficulty, the two students wake up with all the fear of the previous night's adventure. They have to attend the college. Both of them get ready and come near the dissecting room. They find their horse carriage tied nearby. And then they find Jess sitting near the dissecting room on a bench. And nearby we find the dead body of Mr. Henry Armstrong. And he came for his payment. And when they check the dead body, they find there was a fresh wound on the forehead, blood almost still oozing. And what? The previous night they saw him sitting in the coffin, and this morning they find him lying as a dead body with blood oozing from his forehead. And that is the suspense we are going to see now. Let's now go into the lesson in depth. Now what I'm going to do is, I will be reading each paragraph and then we will explain the meaning, narrate it, and then each word, whichever word we have the doubt, we will get it clarified. So if you have the textbook, please keep it open. I think most of you have it. Otherwise, I'll be displaying each paragraph on the screen. Watch it and then follow it up. Now, I'm going to read the first para. Please follow it up. Henry Armstrong was buried, but that did not prove that he was dead. He had always been a difficult man to convince. He lay flat upon his back with his hands crossed upon his stomach and tied with something that he easily broke. The inability to move his body, the black darkness and complete silence made him impossible not to believe that he was buried. So he accepted it. So here it is. The first paragraph introduces the situation. It starts with a surprise or suspense. Henry Armstrong was buried. What does it mean by buried? Buried simply means to place underground. And it can be anything. And here we refer to the dead body being buried in the graveyard. Henry Armstrong was buried, but that he did not prove that he was dead. Suspense in the very first line. He was buried, but he was not dead. How is that? He had always been a difficult man to convince. So, he was a tough man. We can't convince him. Such a strange man. He lay flat upon his back with his hands crossed upon his stomach and tied with something that he easily broke. He was in the coffin, lying flat on his back. And usually, when the dead bodies are buried, they keep the hands on the chest, on the stomach, crossed. And he was in the same position. And it was so black. And it was so dark inside, he could not see anything. But he knew that his hands were tied. Usually it is tied with something so that it will not fall while they carry the dead body. And he could easily break it because it was not a strong one tied with. The inability to move his body, the black darkness and the complete silence made it impossible not believe that he was buried. Now he could not believe that he was buried in the beginning because he was not dead. And he is buried. How? But few evidences made him understand that he was buried. Number one, inability to move his body, could not move. He was lying still because the coffin was small. He can't move about. He can't play as in the football ground. The black darkness, what is inside? Nothing. No light, nothing. He's in the ground, buried within the coffin. So pitch dark. You can't see anything. The complete silence, no sound at all, because under the ground, within the coffin, nothing is heard. And then, though he could not believe that he was buried, now he had to believe he was buried because of these situations. And then, beginning he did not want to accept it, so he accepted it. So finally, he accepted the fact that he was buried without being, dead. That's the first para. So now let's go into the second para. But dead? No. He was only very, very ill. Being so sick, he did not greatly concern himself with the unusual circumstances he found himself in. No philosopher was he, just an ordinary person with a disease. So, with no particular fear for his immediate future, he fell asleep and all was at peace with Henry Armstrong. So, next, a contrasting scene. A calm, peaceful Armstrong. He was buried. But dead? No. A man buried but not dead. This is a strange thing. He was only very, very ill. So what happened was that Henry Armstrong was so ill that people thought he was dead. He did not greatly concern himself with the unusual circumstances he found himself in. So, though he found certain strange things happening around, he did not notice that much because he was so ill, he was not in a mood, in a position, in a capacity to notice that things were going wrong some way because of his illness. No philosopher was he, just an ordinary person with a disease. So, don't think that he is a big philosopher. Who is a philosopher? Philosopher is a person who studies about the nature of knowledge and other things. So, he was not a philosopher, a normal, ordinary person. But he was in such a situation that he was not able to notice what was happening around him. So, with no particular fear for his immediate future, he fell asleep and was all at peace with Henry Armstrong. So, being sick, being tired, not able to notice whatever were happening around, he just fell asleep and a lot of things happened without his notice, but he was at peace, just lying asleep. Now we go to the third para. But something was going on overhead. It was a dark summer night, shot through with occasional shimmers of lightning, silently lighting up a cloud lying low in the west. It was signaling a storm. The brief flashes of light brought out with ghastly clarity the monuments and the headstones of the cemetery and seemed to send them dancing. It was not a night in which any witness whose word could be depended on was likely to be moving about a cemetery. So, the three men who were there digging into the grave of Henry Armstrong felt reasonably secure. So, here we are. We find three people in the graveyard. Let's see what is happening there. The scene is something strange happens in the graveyard, in the cemetery. But something was going on overhead. Overhead means above in the level. So Henry was lying under the ground in a coffin, buried, and overhead, over him, something was happening. Something was overhead going on. And what situation, what time was it? It was a dark summer night, shot through with occasional shimmers of lightning, silently lighting up a cloud lying low in the west. It was pitch dark, as we said, but in the dark summer night, there was some light. What light was that? Occasional shimmers of lightning. There was shimmers of lightning. What do you mean shimmering? A light which is wavering. So here the author refers to the light produced by the lightning in the sky. So a bit of light was coming occasionally because of the lightning. And this lightning was lighting up the cloud lying low in the west. In the west, there were clouds. So in the west, if there are clouds, it is signaling the rain. And the low-lying clouds were lightened up by this light of the shimmering lightning. So, in the utter darkness, in the pitch darkness, a bit of light is seen, and Henry is wondering what is happening up there overhead. It was signaling a storm. So automatically it shows all the circumstances surrounding show that a storm was on the offing. What is a storm, you know? A strong, sudden wind is called a storm. These brief flashes of light brought out with ghastly clarity the monuments and the headstones of the cemetery and seemed to send them dancing. So in this occasional lighting, the light produced by the lightning, we could see there were ghastly scenes were seen. What is meant by ghastly? Ghastly is something that causes great horror or fear. So what is a ghastly sight? We could see the monuments there. What's a monument? Monument is a statue or building to commemorate a person or a thing or an occasion. And we see another word, the headstones. What's a headstone? Headstone is a stone that is placed, or a slab that is placed above the grave with their name and their detail. When they were born, when they died, and what is the speciality of the person. So now what they saw were these brief flashes of light brought out with ghastly clarity the monuments, the headstones and the cemetery, and seemed to set them dancing. And now what monuments are there? What headstones are there? Monuments are the constructions above the graves of the dead bodies. And if you have visited a graveyard, you will find hundreds of graves. And on the graves, we find small monuments, small buildings are built. A number of headstones are placed, registering the name of the person, the year of birth, year of death, etc. And these monuments, they don't look pleasant. They look horrifying at that time of the night. And now, the author says those monuments and headstones were dancing. They looked like dancing because of the shimmering light of the lightning. Yeah, the setting is really ghastly here. The word ghastly is used. And it is in a cemetery. And you know what's a cemetery? I already explained. Cemetery is a place where dead bodies are buried. And the word cemetery is used for a burial ground in connection with a church, the churchyard. Okay? So here we continue. It was not a night in which any witness whose words could be depended on was likely to be moving about at a cemetery. Now, they're doing a crime actually. Why do the word witness is used here? Who is a witness? Witness is a person who tells what they have seen, especially in a court. Now here they are trying to steal a dead body from the burial ground without anybody's knowledge. That's the reason why they came there at midnight without anybody noticing them. Now they were sure if they come at that time, no witness will be moving about in the pitch dark when the storm approaches, in a graveyard, in a cemetery, and no person will be found. So they could do the crime easily at that part of the night. That is the reason why those people selected that time. And they were sure no one was going to see them. No one was going to give witness in the court, if at all they were caught later. So the three men who were there digging into the grave of Mr. Henry Armstrong felt reasonably secure, and they were sure nothing is going to happen. And the three believed that. Who are the three here? One is down, the fourth one. The remaining three, who is one down in the grave? Mr. Henry Armstrong. Who are the remaining three? Mr. Jess, the undertaker. Then the other two are the two medical students who wanted to have a dead body for their studies. But all the three were sure nothing is going to happen to them because they're doing the crime of stealing the dead body at that part of the night when no one would be seeing them. So that is the end of the third paragraph. And here we go with the fourth paragraph. I read, please listen and watch the book or on the screen. Two of them were young students from a medical college a few miles away. The third was a gigantic man known as Jess. For many years, Jess had been employed at the cemetery as a man of all work, and it was his favorite pleasantry that he knew every soul in the place. Outside the wall, farthest from the public road, was a horse and a light wagon waiting. Here, this paragraph talks about the people around and what is happening around there. The first thing we see is two of them were young students from a medical college a few miles away. And you've already said, out of the three people standing in the cemetery, two were young medical students who were from a medical college a few miles away. Now, why did they come here now? Yeah, they wanted to have a dead body for dissecting and studying about the anatomy of the human body. But they wanted to get it in the wrong way, unofficially, paying a little. The third was a gigantic man known as Jess. And who is the third person? The third person's name was Jess. Who is this Jess? Already I introduced you. He was a person employed in the graveyard for many years. He is a person totally in charge of the cemetery, where he digs the holes, digs the ditches, buries the dead person, removes and looks after that. And what type of person was he? He was a gigantic person. What do you mean by gigantic? Gigantic means huge, big in size. And he was working there for many years. Just had been employed at the cemetery as a man of all work. So he was all in one, doing every bit of odd work or whatever be it. And he was a person there. And it was his favorite pleasantry that he knew every soul in the place. So he used to say a pleasantry. What is meant by pleasantry? Pleasantry is a mild joke, not a very serious one, a simple joke. And what was his joke? He used to say, I knew every soul in the place. Why soul? Because after death, dead body remains there and souls get separated from the dead body. So the souls used to be around in the cemetery, it seems, and he was a friend with all the souls, and he must have been playing with them. So for a joke, he used to say, I know all the souls around here. Outside the wall, farthest from the public road, was a horse and a light wagon waiting. Now, we see another thing there. What is that? A horse wagon waiting, not on the public road, not on the main road. It was parked a bit away from the main road. The reason is no one would notice them. So far away from the main road, from the public road, they had parked a wagon, a horse wagon. For what purpose? To carry the dead body to the medical college for the dissecting. Okay, that's the end of the fourth para. And here we go with the fifth paragraph. Please listen. I read, the work of excavation was not difficult. The earth with which the grave had been loosely filled a few hours before offered little resistance and was soon thrown out. Removal of the casket from its grave was less easy, but it was taken out, for it was a perquisite of Jess. He carefully unscrewed the cover and laid it aside, exposing the body in black trousers and white shirt. At that instant, a cracking shock of thunder shook the stunned world, and Henry Armstrong tranquilly sat up. With inarticulate cries, the two students fled in terror. Nothing on earth could have persuaded the two to return, but Jess was of another breed. Okay, let's look into the detail. The work of excavation was not difficult. What is meant by excavation? Excavation is digging something from the ground and taking out is called excavation. So what are they excavating now? They want to excavate the dead body of Henry Armstrong. So the work of excavation was not difficult. The earth with which the grave had been loosely filled a few hours before offered little resistance and was soon thrown out. Now, digging the grave was not difficult now because they had buried the dead body of Sir Henry Armstrong a few hours back and it was loose. So they could easily remove the mud from the grave. So it was easy. Removal of the casket from its grave was less easy. But to take out the coffin, the box in which the dead body is kept, placed, is difficult because the hole, the ditch is small, they can't stand properly and take it out. So it was a bit difficult to take out the coffin out of the grave. But it was taken out, for it was a perquisite of Jess. And now for Jess it was a perquisite. What's a perquisite? Perquisite is a benefit that someone enjoys as part of his job. Now, if Jess cannot take out the coffin, it is an insult for him because he had been working there with the coffins and dead bodies and the ditches and the graves and what not for years. Now, if he says that I can't take out the coffin from the ditch, it's an insult. So, it is a perquisite for him to take out. So, though it was a bit difficult, he took it out. He carefully unscrewed the cover and laid it aside. So, the dead body, usually before it is buried, the lid, the cover of the box is placed and it is screwed, tightened. So he took out the coffin from the grave, placed it, unscrewed carefully so that nothing happens, and took out the lid, the cover of the box, and then kept it aside, exposing the black trousers and white shirt. And now there we could see the dead body lying in the coffin. And usually in European countries, before the burial is done, the dress they wear is black and white. So Henry Armstrong also had a white shirt, neatly pressed, and the tie and everything, and the black trousers, the pant. So we could see the dead body lying in the coffin in black and white. At that instant, a cracking shock of thunder shook the stunned world. And exactly at that moment when they opened the cover of the box, they could hear a frightening, terrifying thunder that shook the whole world. And Henry Armstrong tranquilly sat up. And hearing the sound, Henry, who was buried, and remember, he was not dead, he was just sick. And with the big thunder, he woke up from his sleep and he just sat up in the coffin. Just mind, at that time, in the pitch darkness, the dead body sitting up. And that exactly happened here. Henry Armstrong, hearing the big thunder from up, woke up from his sleep and sat up. And you know what is going to happen there now. With inarticulate cries, the two students fled in terror. What is inarticulate? Inarticulate means unable to clear hear clearly, no clarity. So they started screaming, shouting at the top of their voice because they saw the dead body sitting up in a coffin. And they believe that it is simply the ghost of the person. So without having a second thought, the two youngsters, the two, the medical students fled in fear. It's going to be fled. Flee, past tense of flee, means ran away in fear, not looking left and right or back, and they ran in full speed. And remember, had they run this in the Olympics, they would have got the gold medal, mind it, no doubt. And they were terror stricken. They were full of terror, horrified, ran away. Nothing on earth could have persuaded the two to return now. Nothing in the world could have persuaded. What's in persuade? Convince them to come back. Imagine you offer him a bag full of gold, 1 crore, 10 crores, 100 crore of rupees, and they would say, sorry, no, we don't want, our life is more valuable. And they ran in full speed. But Jess was of another breed. Now what was Jess doing? Though he saw the man sitting up, no reaction, because he was used to the graveyard, the dead bodies and the darkness and the night and the sound and all this. And he was of another breed. He was not a normal type. A breed means here type of person. He was a person with full courage, confidence, and what may come, and then he was not afraid of at all. He stood there while the other two ran away. This is the scene we are in now. Here go with the last para. Very interesting one. The suspense. In the grey of the morning, the two students, pallid and haggard from anxiety and with the terror of the adventure still beating tumultuously in their blood, met at the medical college. You saw it? Cried one. God, yes. What are we to do? They went round to the rear of the building where they saw a horse and a wagon hitched to a gatepost near the door of the dissecting room. Mechanically, they entered the room. On a bench in the semi-darkness sat Jess. He rose, grinning, all eyes and teeth. I'm waiting for my pay, he said. Stretched on a long table lay the body of Henry Armstrong, the head defiled with blood and clay from a blow with a spade. Here we end the suspense. In the grey of the morning, what is by the grey morning? It was not that bright. Early in the morning, the students got up. The two students, pallid and haggard from anxiety and with the terror of the adventure still beating tumultuously in their blood, met at the medical college. The two students, next day morning, early morning, in the grey of the morning, the pale of the morning, they meet in the medical college. Who? The two medical students. How do they look? Pallid and haggard. What's in the pallid and haggard? Pale and tired. Pale. They look very dull and they look very tired because it was not a normal night they had the previous night. Terrifying, horror-defining night. And they were full of anxiety even now. Why? Because they had a terrifying night the previous night. And their adventure was not normal one. It was a horrifying adventure. And their heart was still beating tumultuously. What is meant tumultuously? Very loud, because they were still frightened. They were still worried. They were in tension. And the blood was beating hard in their heart, met at the medical college. So they were in a terrifying mood and frightened still. And the first dialogue by one, "You saw it?" cried one. One said, "Hi friend, did you really see that? Was it a reality or we were in our dreams, what we saw last night?" "God, yes, what are we to do? Really, oh my God, what a scary scene was it. What a terrifying scene it was. I too really saw it. Now what shall we do?" They went around to the rear of the building. So now, talking that, they went to the rear of the building. What is in the rear? The back of the building, where they saw a horse and a wagon hitched to the gatepost near the door of the dissecting room. They were surprised to see the same, the horse and the wagon hitched. What's meant by hitched? Hitched simply means move with a jerk. They saw the carriage just moving with a jerk way at the dissecting room. What's a dissecting room? Dissecting room is a room in a medical college especially, where they cut the dead body of a person to learn about the anatomy of the body of person, the internal organs. So they near the dissecting room, and they saw something. What was that? The horse and the wagon which they took to the graveyard, to the cemetery the previous night, being tied to a tree there. They entered the room. They are not the normal senses. Mechanically, slowly, automatically, without their conscious mind, they entered the room. And what do they see there? On a bench in the semi-darkness sat Jess. They see someone, most unexpected person in the room. In the semi-darkness, it was half dark. They find a person. Who is that? Jess. You know who Jess is? The person working in the cemetery, sitting there on a bench. He rose, grinning, all eyes and teeth. And then suddenly he rose. What do you mean by rose? Rose is a past tense of rise. Means he got up, grinning. Means giving a wide smile. His eyes and his mouth were full of laugh. "I'm waiting for my pay," he said. He said, "Hi friends, I'm Jess. You remember me? We met last night." Can they forget him? It was such a meeting. So he says, "I'm Jess. I'm here waiting for my pay. Please give my pay." Stretched on a long table lay the body of Henry Armstrong. Now, they were surprised. Why do they need to pay? They agreed to pay the amount for the dead body of Henry Armstrong, but the mission was a failure. So they were wondering. Meanwhile, they just saw the dead body of the same person lying on a bench, stretched on a long table lay the body of Henry Armstrong. They could not believe. The person whom they sitting up in the coffin the previous night was lying as a dead body on a table. How was that? The head defiled with blood and clay from a blow of a spade. Now, the forehead was filled with, the head was defiled or filled with patches of blood and patches of mud. How? That wound was created or made by the blow of a spade. Now, what happened here? It's only a thing to imagine. The head is injured. Yesterday there was no injury. Today for the dead body there is an injury. Simply it could mean that while Henry Armstrong sat up and the two students ran away, what could Jess have done? He must have given a blow with a spade, the instrument for digging the ground, on the head, and that was enough for Henry Armstrong to die. So automatically he killed him with a single blow of the spade, and he completed his agreement of bringing the dead body to the medical students. And looks really horrible actually. So the wound, the blood simply suggests that he was killed by the blow of the spade, and the dead body is there. And automatically we understand the students must have paid him the amount that they agreed upon, and then he must have gone. And here ends the suspense story by Ambrose Bierce, and almost all his stories of this type. And I guess you understood it in totality, and we will continue with the remaining part of it later in the next part of the class. Thank you.